At 2:14 in the morning, a cop pressed the barrel of his service weapon against a woman's car window and laughed. Not because she had done anything wrong, because he could. Because she was alone on a dark road in scrubs with a hospital badge, and he had a gun and a badge of his own. And in his experience, that combination ended conversations before they started. What Officer Marcus Drell did not know, could not have known, was that the woman sitting perfectly still on the other side of that glass had once kept 3 soldiers alive in a collapsed building in the middle of a war zone with nothing but field dressings and her own hands. She had faced worse than him. She had survived worse than him. And she was already, very quietly, deciding what to do next. If this story already has you gripped, follow my channel, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The shift had started the way most night shifts started at Hartwell Regional Medical Center. Not with a bang, but with the slow grind of a system stretched past its limits. Nora Voss had clocked in at 7 the previous evening, which meant by the time 2 in the morning arrived, she had already been on her feet for 7 hours. She had restarted a man's heart in Bay 3. She had talked a teenager out of pulling out her IV for the 4th time. She had held a compress against a construction worker's forearm while the attending finished a call, and she had done all of it without complaint, without ceremony, without any of the dramatic speeches that people in movies deliver when they do something difficult. That was just the work. The work was always like that. Nora was 28 years old and she had been at Hartwell for 14 months. Before that, she had been somewhere else entirely. A life that looked nothing like this one, that she didn't talk about, that she kept folded up and stored somewhere she didn't have to look at every day. What people saw when they looked at her was exactly what she wanted them to see. A competent, quiet, slightly too serious emergency nurse who drank too much coffee and never seemed to take a full lunch break. That was the whole picture, as far as anyone at the hospital was concerned. The town of Grover Mills, Nebraska was the kind of place where that kind of anonymity was easy to maintain. It wasn't small enough for everyone to know everyone, but it wasn't large enough for anyone to get lost in either. The hospital sat on the eastern edge of town, a regional facility that served Grover Mills and 4 surrounding counties, which meant its emergency department pulled from a wide enough net to stay busy without ever feeling like a trauma center in a major city. Busy, but manageable. That was how Nora liked it. She finished her shift notes at 1:58 a.m., passed handoff to the overnight charge nurse, a heavy-set, permanently exhausted man named Tolliver who communicated almost entirely in grunts, and walked out through the ambulance bay into the cold. Nebraska in March had a particular kind of cold. Not the sharp, clean cold of a mountain winter, more like a damp, pressing cold that got into your joints and reminded you it was there with every step. Nora had grown up in Wisconsin, so she was used to it mostly, but she still pulled her jacket tighter as she crossed the parking lot to her car. A 6-year-old Subaru, the color of old concrete. She had bought it because it started reliably in cold weather and because it was forgettable. Both things still held true. She pulled out of the Hartwell lot at 2:04 and took the county road that cut through the flat eastern edge of Grover Mills toward the apartment complex where she rented a 2-bedroom unit she used as a 1-bedroom because she needed somewhere to put the equipment she kept, for reasons she didn't explain to anyone. The road was empty. It was always empty at this hour. 2 miles of straight asphalt with farmland on both sides. No other lights, just the pale cone of her headlights and the occasional reflector post. She saw the cruiser's lights come on in her rearview mirror at 2:11. No siren. Just the lights, red and blue cycling in the dark behind her. She checked her speed, 4 miles under the limit, which was what she always drove on this stretch because the county road had a reputation for deer crossings, and she had hit one 3 years ago and had no interest in doing it again. She signaled, pulled onto the gravel shoulder, stopped, and cut the engine. She already had her license out of her wallet by the time the officer reached her window. Military habit. Get the documents ready. Don't make movements that look sudden. Keep your hands visible. She knew the protocol better than most civilians because she had trained alongside people whose jobs occasionally required pulling over vehicles in conditions that made rural Nebraska look like a resort. The flashlight hit her face before the officer spoke. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the light. License and registration. The voice was flat and slightly bored, the way voices got when a person had performed the same action enough times that it had stopped requiring thought. She held up her license. He took it without looking at her, shone the flashlight down at it, then at the Subaru's interior, then at her hospital badge, which was still clipped to the chest pocket of her jacket. "Where are you coming from?" "Hartwell Regional," she said. "I'm a nurse. Just ended my shift." The flashlight moved back to her face, stayed there a beat too long. "Hartwell?" he repeated. "Yes." She could see him now with the flashlight angled slightly. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, heavy through the shoulders, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete and never softened. His nameplate read Drell. M. Drell. His uniform was pressed sharp, which told her either he had started his shift recently or he was the kind of person who cared about looking sharp, and the expression on his face suggested it was the latter. "You know why I pulled you over?" "No," she said honestly. "Tail light," he said. "Passenger side. It's out." She didn't argue. She didn't know if it was true. She made a mental note to check it in the morning. "I'll get that fixed," she said. He didn't move. He stood at her window with his flashlight pointed at her face, which was the part she found mildly interesting, because if he was just issuing a warning for a taillight, the standard protocol was to go back to the cruiser, run the plate, come back with the warning slip. He wasn't doing that. He was just standing there, looking at her. "You got any idea," he said slowly, "what you were doing back there at the four-way?" She had gone through the four-way. It was a four-way stop at the intersection of County Road 11 and a farm access road that she had never once seen another vehicle use. "I stopped," she said. "Did you?" "Yes." Didn't look like a full stop to me. She was quiet for a moment. The thing she had learned a long time ago in situations that were considerably higher stakes than this one was that arguing with a person who had already decided what they believed was a waste of time and energy. Not because they were always wrong, sometimes because they were wrong and knew it and didn't care, which was a different problem entirely. "If I rolled it," she said, "I apologize. That wasn't my intention." He finally moved, but not toward his cruiser. He took a step closer to her window, which meant he was now close enough that if she'd opened the door, it would have caught him in the knee. "Hartwell Regional," he said again, like the name tasted like something. "You know we've been getting complaints about that place." She didn't respond to that. "Staff walking out with stuff that doesn't belong to them," he continued. "Medications, equipment, you know anything about that?" The shift in the conversation was abrupt enough that even someone without her training would have noticed it. They had moved from a traffic stop to an insinuation of theft inside of 90 seconds, without any logical connective tissue between the two. She kept her voice even. "No," she said. "I don't." "You sure about that?" It wasn't a question the way he said it. "I'm sure." He bent down slightly, leaning against her car door with one forearm, which put his face closer to hers. She could see his eyes clearly now. There wasn't anger in them, which she'd expected. There was something more like amusement. "You don't look like someone who should be working a place like Hartwell," he said. She waited. "What's that mean?" "Just an observation." He smiled a little. It didn't reach his eyes. "You seem nervous." She was not nervous. She was tired from a 7-hour shift and mildly irritated, but not nervous, and the idea that her stillness could be misread as anxiety was almost interesting to her. "I'm not nervous," she said. "That's so. That's so." He looked at her for another moment, then reached down and, slowly, deliberately, with the kind of deliberateness that was meant to be noticed, unsnapped the retention strap on his holster, not drawing, just unsnapping. Nora Voss looked at his hand, then looked back at his face. She said nothing. She kept her hands exactly where they were, on the steering wheel, visible, still. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he said. "On what grounds?" She kept her voice completely neutral when she said it. "I said, step out." She stepped out. Because the situation called for compliance, not confrontation, and because she had been in enough situations with enough people who were armed and irrational to know the difference between a moment to push back and a moment to absorb. She stood in the cold beside her car, hands at her sides, and let him run through his inventory. Asked her to put her hands on the roof, did a brief pat-down that was about 15% more thorough than it needed to be, found nothing, because there was nothing to find. He stepped back and looked at her in the wash of his cruiser's headlights. "I'm going to be watching Hartwell," he said, "and I'm going to be watching you." She looked at him steadily. "Okay," she said. "You think this is funny?" "No," she said. He held her gaze for a long moment, then pushed her license back into her hand. Not handed, pushed, so the edge of the laminated card caught the heel of her palm. "Get that taillight fixed," he said. He walked back to his cruiser. She watched him pull off the shoulder and disappear down the county road. Then she stood in the cold for another moment, hands hanging at her sides, and looked at the space where his taillights had been. She didn't feel scared. She wasn't built for scared, not anymore, not the way she'd been rewired by the places she'd been. What she felt was something quieter and more considered, the kind of feeling that comes when you recognize a pattern you've seen before. A specific type of person who uses power not to enforce rules but to remind other people that they have none. She had met his type before. She knew exactly how those stories ended. Hartwell Regional Medical Center had been built in the 1970s and renovated twice, once in the 90s, badly, and once in 2011, which had produced a functional, if aesthetically depressing emergency wing that smelled permanently of institutional cleaner and old coffee. The staff was overworked, competent, and chronically short on sleep, which was true of every emergency department in a regional facility in America, and which produced a particular kind of gallows camaraderie that Nora had quietly come to appreciate. She arrived for her next shift 2 evenings later and found that something had shifted. It was in the way Tolliver looked at her when she came in. Not his usual grunt and nod, but something more careful, like he was checking for a reaction before committing to an expression. It was in the way Priya Anand, one of the other floor nurses and the closest thing Nora had to a friend at the hospital, met her in the break room with her arms crossed and her mouth pulled tight. "There's a thing," Priya said. "What kind of thing?" "A thing with administration." Priya uncrossed her arms and picked up her coffee cup. She was 34, small and precise, with a directness that Nora appreciated. "Hargrove called a meeting this morning. Without you." Sandra Hargrove was the director of nursing operations, and the kind of administrator who had been in her position long enough to have calcified into the bureaucratic furniture. She was not hostile. She was not warm. She was a set of procedures and a clipboard. "What kind of meeting?" Nora said. "Inventory concerns." Priya said it carefully. Specifically, a discrepancy in the controlled substance log. 2 missing vials of fentanyl, logged out under different circumstances, but she stopped, set her cup down. "Nora, your access log came up." The room was quiet except for the coffee maker. "My access log," Nora said. "You were the last nurse to pull from that cabinet on Tuesday night." Tuesday night, the night of the traffic stop. The night she had come back from her shift and stood on the county road shoulder in the cold. "I didn't take anything," she said. "I know that," Priya said immediately. Then, "I know that." Priya's voice dropped. "But Hargrove's running a formal review, and the person who brought the discrepancy to her attention was—" She hesitated. "Was who?" Priya exhaled through her nose. "Officer Drell, from the county sheriff's department. He came in yesterday morning and spoke with Hargrove directly, told her Hartwell had been flagged as part of an ongoing investigation into medical supply theft." Nora was still for a moment. "Drell," she said. "You know him?" She thought about the flashlight in her face, the unsnapped holster, the pushed license. "We've met," she said. Well, the formal review took 4 days. During those 4 days, Nora worked her assigned shifts, documented everything with a specificity that went well beyond what was required, and said almost nothing to anyone who wasn't a patient. She answered every question Hargrove's team asked her directly, and without defensiveness. She pulled the medication log herself and walked through her dispensing entries line by line. She knew what she had taken and what she had returned, and she had documentation for all of it. None of it mattered. On the 5th day, Sandra Hargrove called her into the administrative suite and told her, in the careful language of people who have practiced saying difficult things without taking responsibility for them, that pending the outcome of the investigation, she was being placed on administrative leave. "This is a precautionary measure," Hargrove said. "I understand," Nora said. "Your access credentials will be suspended effective." "I understand," she said again. She walked out of the administrative suite, collected her personal items from the staff locker room, and left through the ambulance bay. She sat in her car in the parking lot for approximately 2 minutes, not because she was devastated, not because she was falling apart, but because she needed 2 minutes to think clearly before she started moving. What she was thinking was this: Marcus Drell had pulled her over on a dark road and found nothing on her, so he had manufactured something. He had gone to her employer within 48 hours of a traffic stop and planted the suggestion of an ongoing investigation that may or may not have existed. And it had worked, because it always worked, because institutions that are underfunded and understaffed and perpetually worried about liability will default to removal when someone with a badge tells them to worry. She had been removed, which meant that whatever Drell was protecting, it was something he considered important enough to spend political capital on. Something worth burning a nurse over, something she had gotten close to or could potentially get close to, though she couldn't yet see how her shift at Hartwell could have intersected with anything worth that kind of preemptive action. She started the car and drove home. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. The particular ordered stillness of a space inhabited by a person who had grown up in environments where disorder had operational consequences. She changed out of her scrubs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and a legal pad, and began writing down everything she could remember about Marcus Drell from the night of the stop. Badge number, partially visible, beginning with 44. Vehicle unit number 217 on the door panel. His posture when he walked, right shoulder dropped slightly, old injury or habit. The way he'd mentioned Hartwell specifically, not simply the hospital, but the full name, before she'd had any reason to tell him where she worked. Her badge had been visible, but the hospital name on the badge was small. He'd either looked more carefully than a routine stop warranted, or he'd already known. She wrote that down separately and underlined it. She spent the next 3 days not being idle. She drove past the county sheriff's substation twice at different hours, not stopping, not slowing, just establishing the rhythm of activity. How many vehicles were in the lot? Which shifts overlapped? Who arrived together? She walked through the county property records online and found the parcels surrounding the farm access road where Drell had pulled her over. She pulled the public incident reports for Grover Mills going back 18 months and read through them methodically, looking for patterns in how complaints were filed and dismissed. She found something on the 4th night. 3 separate complaints filed against Officer Drell over 14 months, all from people in the eastern corridor of the county, all describing the same basic interaction: stopped without clear cause, subjected to searches without consent, accused of vague crimes, released without citation or arrest. All 3 complaints had been reviewed internally and dismissed within 2 weeks of filing. One of the complainants was a nurse at a private clinic on the eastern edge of town. One was a truck driver who made regular runs to a pharmaceutical distribution warehouse 20 miles out. One was a delivery driver for a medical supply company. Medical supply. Pharmaceutical distribution. A nurse. Not random. Not even close to random. She leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. There was a pipeline out there somewhere. Someone was moving medical supplies or pharmaceuticals off the books through the eastern corridor, and Drell was either part of it or protecting it, and his method for dealing with people who might stumble too close to it was to stop them on that dark county road and assess them. And if they were the kind of person who might be a problem, do something preemptive about it. The question was what was moving, and where it was going, and who else was involved. She was a nurse on administrative leave with a legal pad and a laptop and no institutional backing. What she had instead was a different kind of training, the kind that didn't come in a curriculum and didn't show up on a resume, and that she had spent 14 months trying to quietly leave behind. The kind that had been built for operating in environments where you couldn't trust the official structure, where the official structure was the problem, where the correct approach was to be patient and precise and invisible and let the evidence accumulate until it was impossible to ignore. She was good at that. She had been good at that in places where the stakes were considerably higher than this. On the 6th day of her suspension, Priya Anand texted her at 10:47 in the morning. "Can you meet me? Not at the hospital." They met at a diner on the western side of Grover Mills, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that came in a pot and was refilled without asking. Priya slid into the booth across from her and pulled off her coat and didn't bother with small talk. Drell was back, she said, at Hartwell. Yesterday. He wasn't alone. There was another officer, younger, I don't know his name, and a man in a suit who Hargrove introduced as a county compliance liaison. Priya's voice carried a particular kind of controlled frustration that Nora recognized as the sound of someone who was angry and couldn't afford to show it openly. They walked the medication storage rooms, both of them, with Hargrove. What were they looking for? They didn't say, officially, but they asked about the pharmaceutical delivery schedule, when shipments come in, how they're logged, which staff sign for them. Nora turned her coffee cup slowly on its saucer. Which staff sign for deliveries, she repeated. I know, Priya said. The delivery logistics at Hartwell were handled by a rotating schedule of nursing supervisors and one administrative coordinator. The pharmaceutical shipments from their primary distributor, Meridian Supply, came in twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. Nora had signed for 3 of them in the past 6 weeks. Her name was in the delivery log. Did they pull the delivery logs? She asked. Hargrove gave them copies, Priya said quietly. I saw her make them. Nora looked out the diner window at the parking lot. A truck was idling at the far end, engine running, no one visible in the cab. Priya, she said, how long have you been at Hartwell? 6 years? In 6 years, have you ever seen a county officer walk the medication storage rooms? Priya was quiet. No, she said. Have you ever seen Hargrove give delivery logs to law enforcement without a warrant? Priya picked up her coffee cup and held it with both hands without drinking from it. She said they had a county authorization, she said. I didn't see it. Did you ask to see it? A pause. No, Priya said. I didn't. They sat with that for a moment. I want to show you something, Nora said. She pulled out her phone and opened the document she'd been building. The incident reports, the complaint records, the property parcels, the note about the 3 previous stops. She laid the phone on the table between them and let Priya read. Priya read for a long time without speaking. She set her coffee cup down at some point and didn't pick it up again. The clinic nurse, she said finally, looking up. Tara Beckwith. I know her. I went to her clinic once. It's in Dunmore. That's about 12 miles east on County Road 11. On the same road, Nora said. Yes. Was she stopped on the same stretch? Priya looked at the incident report address. Her expression changed in a small but unmistakable way. Yes, she said. The truck in the parking lot was still idling. Nora watched it for a moment. Then she picked up her phone, locked the screen, and put it back in her jacket pocket. Don't mention this to anyone at Hartwell, she said. Nora, I'm not asking you to do anything. I just need you to not say anything. Can you do that? Priya looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite recognition, but the leading edge of it. You're not just going to let this go, are you? She said. It wasn't really a question. No, Nora said. Is there something about you I should know? Nora looked at the window again. The truck had pulled out of the lot while they were talking. She hadn't seen it go. There are things about me that aren't relevant right now, she said. What's relevant is that someone is using this county's law enforcement to run interference on medical supply chains, and they tried to remove me from a position where I could see it, which means I'm close enough to something to be a problem. I want to find out what that something is. Priya looked at her for a long moment. Be careful, she said. I will be, Nora said. Gim. She drove home the long way, past the county road, past the 4-way stop, past the farm access road where Drell had pulled her over. She slowed when she reached the spot, just enough to look at the field that ran behind the access road's gate. In the daylight, she could see what she couldn't have seen at 2:14 in the morning, a pair of tire tracks running through the dead winter grass, leading toward a structure at the back of the property. Metal roof, low profile, the kind of building that could be agricultural storage or could be something else entirely, depending on what was inside it. She didn't stop. She kept driving. She noted the parcel number from the county record she'd already pulled and cross-referenced it mentally. The property was registered to a land management company called Elk Basin Holdings, LLC. She had looked it up 2 nights ago. Elk Basin Holdings had been incorporated 18 months ago. Its registered agent was a law firm in Lincoln. Its listed purpose was agricultural equipment leasing. 18 months. 1 month before the first of Drell's pattern stops. She drove past and kept her speed even and her hands steady on the wheel and said nothing aloud because there was no one to say anything to, and because she had learned a long time ago in places that had nothing to do with Grover Mills, Nebraska, that the most dangerous moment in any operation was the moment you thought you understood what you were looking at. She didn't understand yet. She had a shape, she had a timeline and a pattern and a piece of geography. She didn't have the center of it. She needed more. She pulled into her apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, looking at nothing in particular, running through the variables with the particular focused quiet that people who had known her in another context would have recognized immediately and that no one in Grover Mills had ever seen. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, text message. You should have stayed out of it. Last warning. She read it once. Then she took a screenshot, saved it, and sat very still in the cold car for 30 seconds. Then she unlocked her phone and opened a different contact. One she hadn't used in 14 months, stored under a name that meant nothing to anyone who might have seen it in her contact list. A number she had been given when she'd left with the understanding that leaving didn't mean gone. It meant different, and that different had its own set of conditions. She typed a single sentence. I need to make contact. She pressed send and watched the message status change to delivered. Then she put the phone in her pocket, got out of the car, and went inside. Whoever had sent that warning had made a mistake. Not the obvious kind, not the kind you could point to and explain simply. The mistake was subtler than that. It was the mistake of sending a warning to someone who responded to threat not with fear, but with the particular narrowed attention of a person who has just been told that they are close enough to something that someone is afraid of them. She was close. She didn't know yet to what, but she was going to find out. And somewhere east of Grover Mills, in a low metal building at the back of a field, registered to a shell company with an 18-month paper trail, something was moving that wasn't supposed to be moving. And a county officer with a practiced sneer and an unsnapped holster was counting on her to be exactly what he had decided she was when he pressed his flashlight against her face on that dark road. Just a nurse. He had no idea how wrong he was. The reply came at 6:43 the next morning. Not a call. A text. Same as hers. Same stripped-down efficiency. Stand by. Confirming identity. Don't move on anything until you hear back. Nora set the phone face down on the kitchen table and made herself eat breakfast. Scrambled eggs, slightly overcooked because she'd been reading the property records again while the pan was on the heat. She ate them anyway. She had eaten worse things in worse places, and complaining about texture had never struck her as a productive use of energy. The contact she'd reached out to was a man named Garrett Hsu, who held a title she had never been entirely clear on, and who operated out of an office she had never visited, and who had been the person who processed her separation paperwork 14 months ago with the particular careful neutrality of someone who understood that people left for real reasons, and that asking too many questions about those reasons was not his job. What was his job, as far as she could tell, was knowing where people like Nora ended up and maintaining a thread of connection that was supposed to be dormant unless something made it necessary. She had just made it necessary. She didn't know exactly what Garrett would do with her message. She didn't know if what she'd stumbled into was large enough to warrant whatever machinery sat on the other end of that number. What she knew was that she had a threatening text from an unknown sender, a pattern of witness intimidation across a 12-mile corridor, a shell company with an 18-month paper trail, and a county officer who had gone directly to her employer within 48 hours of meeting her. That was enough to flag. Whether it was enough to move on was someone else's call. In the meantime, she had her own work to do. No. The Meridian Supply Distribution Warehouse sat 22 miles east of Grover Mills, off a state highway that ran through flat, empty country toward the Iowa border. It was a legitimate operation. She'd verified that much through public business records. A mid-sized pharmaceutical and medical supply distributor that serviced hospitals, clinics, and care facilities across 4 counties. Hartwell Regional was one of roughly 30 clients on their regional delivery route. She drove past it twice over 2 days, not stopping, noting the delivery trucks that moved in and out, the timing of the loading dock activity, the single security camera mounted above the main entrance that covered the front lot, but nothing around the side or rear. On the second drive-by, a Tuesday, she pulled into a gas station a quarter-mile up the highway and watched the Meridian truck that made the Hartwell run pull out of the lot at 9:17 a.m. and head west. The same truck that would have been at Hartwell on the Tuesday, her name appeared in the delivery log. She photographed the plate number. Then she drove home and did not call anyone and did not do anything impulsive, because impulsive was the thing she had trained herself out of a long time ago, and because the situation was still assembling itself and moving before it was assembled was how people got hurt. On Thursday, Priya texted her again. Hargrove asked about your emergency contact info today, said it was for HR records. Felt weird. Nora read that twice. Emergency contact information was in her HR file. It had been since she was hired. Hargrove did not need to ask for it separately unless she was giving it to someone who didn't have internal HR access. She thought about who might want her emergency contact information and could not come up with a reassuring answer. She called her sister in Milwaukee that night, just to talk, she said, which was mostly true and also partially a way of letting someone who knew her actual name and her actual history know that she was in a situation that had begun to feel like something. Her sister, who had spent enough years watching Nora come and go from things she didn't explain to have developed a finely calibrated radar for this particular tone of voice, said, "How bad?" "I don't know yet," Nora said. "Probably fine." "You always say probably fine, because it usually is." "And the times it wasn't?" "Those times I didn't call," Nora said. Her sister was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay, I'll keep my phone on." Garrett called on Friday at noon. She stepped out of her apartment into the parking lot to take it, which was habit rather than necessity, but some habits were worth keeping. "Your message got flagged up," he said, without preamble. His voice was the same as she remembered it, a mild, unhurried baritone that belonged on a public radio station and gave no indication of anything in particular. "There's already a file." She stopped walking. "On Drell," she said. "On the corridor. The Elk Basin property came up in an asset tracking inquiry 8 months ago. DEA preliminary. They didn't have enough to move, and the file got deprioritized." A pause. "Until now." "What changed?" "You partly. Your contact triggered a cross-reference, but also..." Another pause, shorter. "There was an incident 2 nights ago at a clinic in Dunmore. A break-in. Medical supply storage was hit. Clinic nurse was on site. She called it in, and the responding officer..." "Drell," Nora said. "Deputy named Fassett, but Drell was on scene within 9 minutes. Incident report describes it as a standard burglary. The clinic nurse says the responding officers didn't bag anything, didn't photograph the storage room, and left in under 20 minutes. Tara Beckwith. The nurse Priya had named, the one from the county record, the one who'd been stopped on County Road 11. "Is the nurse okay?" Nora asked. "Shaken. Not physically hurt." "Is she talking to anyone?" "Not yet," Garrett said. "She doesn't know who to talk to. That's part of the problem." He paused. "The DEA inquiry identified Elk Basin as a possible staging point for diverted pharmaceuticals. Specifically, fentanyl and oxycodone pulled from legitimate supply chains and redirected before they hit their destination facilities. Small enough volumes per shipment that it doesn't trigger automatic flags, large enough in aggregate to be worth doing. The missing vials at Hartwell, not planted there to frame her, pulled from the supply chain before the delivery logged, and her name used as the paper cover because she was convenient and already in the system. They've been skimming deliveries, she said, and logging the shortage against nursing staff. That's the working theory, Garrett said. It keeps the loss internal to the receiving facility, which means any investigation stays at the facility level, which Drell can manage. How many facilities are on this route? Meridian services 31 clients in the 4-county area. We don't know how many are being hit. She thought about that. 31 facilities. Even if only half were being skimmed, even at small volumes per delivery, the math got large quickly. What do you need from me? She said. Right now, nothing active. The DEA field office is moving to reopen the Elk Basin file. But it takes time, and in that time, he stopped. In that time, they know I'm looking, she said. Yes. The text I received. We're working on tracing it, likely a burner, but there are ways. He paused one more time, with the slight hesitation of someone choosing how much to say. Nora, these people have been running this for at least 18 months. They have a law enforcement asset, they have an administrative contact inside at least one facility, and they have demonstrated willingness to go after individuals who get close. I need you to understand that the way you can help most right now is by not becoming a problem they feel they have to solve more permanently. She understood what he was saying. She had understood it before he said it. I'll be careful, she said. I know you will, he said. That's not the same thing as what I just asked you. She almost smiled. I'll be careful, she said again, and ended the call. Again, she was careful. She was careful for 4 days, which felt longer than 4 days because careful, when you had a specific kind of training and a specific kind of mind, required conscious effort in a way that moving didn't. She stayed in her apartment mostly. She went for runs in the morning on routes that varied enough to be unpredictable, and that took her past the kind of sight lines she had been assessing without fully meaning to since this started. The stretch of commercial buildings on the west side where the parking lot of a closed-down hardware store gave a clean view of 2 blocks in either direction, the walking trail that ran behind the apartment complex that had 2 exits and no dead ends. On the 3rd day, she found the car, a gray sedan parked on the street that ran alongside her complex. Different position each day, but always on that street, always with a sight line to the apartment entrance. She spotted it the first morning because the driver was in it, which people sitting in parked cars on residential streets before 8 in the morning generally weren't. The second morning, the car was empty, but a coffee cup on the dash had a fresh condensation ring. Third morning, same car, same position, engine off, and the side mirror was angled slightly inward in a way that let the driver watch the street behind them without turning their head. She didn't react to it. She bought her groceries, came home, put things away. She copied her evidence file onto 2 separate USB drives and mailed one to her sister in Milwaukee with a note that said, "Hold this, open it only if I ask you to." The other one she kept. On the 4th day, she called Priya. "I need something from inside the hospital," she said. "The delivery logs. Not copies, the originals, specifically the signature pages for the last 6 Tuesday deliveries from Meridian." A silence. "Nora," Priya said carefully, "I could lose my job." "I know. I'm not asking you to take them anywhere. I just need you to look at them and tell me if the volume numbers match the invoice numbers on the same page." "I don't know what that means." "Each delivery has 2 numbers, what was invoiced and what was signed for. They should always match exactly. If they don't, the discrepancy should have a written explanation attached. I want to know if those explanations exist." Another silence, longer. "Why wouldn't they match?" Priya said. "Because someone might have been pulling items from the delivery before it was logged and adjusting the paperwork afterward. If the adjustments are there, they'll be in handwriting that isn't yours or mine, and they'll show up across multiple deliveries, not just one." She could hear Priya breathing on the other end of the line. "If I do this," Priya said slowly, "and someone finds out I looked, supervisors review those logs regularly. You have access as a floor nurse. Looking at them is not unusual. Looking at 6 weeks of them at once might be." "Don't do it all at once," Nora said. "Pick 2. 2 Tuesday deliveries 2 weeks apart. Just tell me what you see." 3 days later, Priya sent her a text with 2 photographs attached. Delivery log signature pages. The images were slightly blurry because Priya's hands hadn't been steady when she'd taken them, and Nora understood exactly why, because she had stood in situations like that herself, and steadiness was harder than people thought when the stakes got real. She zoomed in on the volume columns. 4 line items across the 2 deliveries showed a discrepancy. Small amounts, between 2 and 6 units per line, with a handwritten notation in the margin of each. The notations were initialed, not with a full name, just 2 letters, M. D. Marcus Drell. She stared at that for a long time. He hadn't just been running interference at the hospital level. He had been inside the paperwork. which meant he had access to Hartwell's receiving area on delivery days, which meant someone inside the hospital had been letting him in, not as a visitor, not as a responding officer, but as someone with standing to mark up internal receiving documents, someone with administrative authority. She thought about Sandra Hargrove walking 2 officers and a man in a suit through the medication storage rooms. She thought about Hargrove handing over delivery log copies without asking to see an authorization. She thought about Hargrove asking for Nora's emergency contact information from a file that Hargrove already had. She opened her laptop and started pulling Hargrove's public record. Years at Hartwell, previous positions, professional affiliations. It took her 2 hours to find it, buried in a county business registry from 4 years ago. Sandra Hargrove, listed as a founding member of an LLC called ClearPath Administrative Solutions, dissolved 18 months ago. 18 months ago. 1 month before Elk Basin Holdings was incorporated. The same month. Demute. She was still at her laptop at 11 p.m. when she heard the sound from the parking lot. Not loud, just wrong. A car that sat idling too long in one spot before the engine cut. She turned off her desk lamp and moved to the window, standing to the side of the frame rather than in front of it, and looked down at the lot. The gray sedan was there. Same one she'd been watching for 4 days, and it wasn't on the street this time. It was inside the complex lot, parked 2 rows from her building, and there was someone in it and someone outside it. And the person outside it was walking toward the building entrance in a way that was not a person walking home. She moved away from the window. She was already thinking through exits, timing, options, the way she had been trained to think through them, the way that didn't feel like panic because it wasn't panic, it was procedure. It was the application of a particular set of skills to a particular set of circumstances that had just changed. She picked up her phone and texted Garrett. Active surveillance, 1 unit outside, 1 approaching my building, time-stamped now. She grabbed the USB drive from the table, her jacket, her keys. She went to the hallway and listened. The building had 2 stairwells, the front entrance and a rear fire door that opened onto the alley behind the complex. The rear door had an alarm. She had checked its maintenance record the week she moved in and found that the alarm sensor had been listed as non-functional for 8 months with no repair scheduled, which meant the door opened silently. She had noted that at the time for reasons she hadn't fully acknowledged, even to herself. She heard the elevator engage 2 floors below. She was already moving toward the rear stairwell when her phone buzzed in her hand. Not Garrett. Unknown number. The same unknown number as before. The text said, "You should have walked away when you had the chance." She read it, put the phone in her pocket, pushed through the stairwell door without making a sound. Whoever was in that elevator was going to find an empty apartment and a cold coffee cup and a laptop with an open browser window showing 18 months of business registry records. And they were going to understand that what they'd been surveilling wasn't a frightened nurse waiting to be managed. But that was later. Right now she hit the ground floor, crossed to the fire door, pressed the bar, and stepped out into the cold alley behind the building, where, 20 feet away, a third person was waiting in the shadow of the dumpster enclosure with their hands in their jacket pockets, and the alley's single overhead light was out. The figure in the shadow didn't move toward her. That was the first thing she registered. A person who was there to intercept her would have moved. This one stayed still, which meant either they hadn't seen her yet, or they had seen her and were waiting for something, and neither of those options was good, but one of them was manageable. She didn't run. Running created noise and committed her to a direction, and she didn't yet know what was at the end of the alley in either direction. She had used the fire door maybe 4 times since moving in and had never been out here at night. Left end of the alley connected to the street she knew. Right end she wasn't sure about. The dumpster enclosure was 12 feet to her right, the figure just behind it, close enough that she could hear the soft sound of their breathing in the cold. She moved left. Flat against the wall of the building, heel to toe, measured, no scrape of shoe on concrete. The figure shifted. Voss? She stopped. The voice was low, deliberately low, and it took her 2 full seconds to place it, not because she didn't know it, but because context was wrong, because the voice belonged to a face she associated with fluorescent lighting and bad coffee, and not with dark alleys at 11 at night. She turned her head. Tara Beckwith stepped out of the shadow of the dumpster enclosure with her hands visible and her face doing the thing faces did when a person was trying to project calm and not quite getting there. She was somewhere in her early 40s, compact, with the particular quality of stillness that nurses who'd worked small-town clinics for years tended to develop. A stillness born of limited resources and the need to stay functional under conditions that should have broken you. "Priya told me where you lived," she said. "I've been out here for 2 hours. I didn't know how to—" She stopped, looked at the USB drive in Nora's hand, then at the jacket and keys, then at the fire door still closing slowly behind her. "You were leaving." "Someone's in the building," Nora said quietly. Tara's face went still in a different way. "Coming for you?" "I don't know, maybe." She moved. "Come on. Not here." They went left, out the alley end and onto the street, moving quickly but not running, which was a different thing. Nora's car was in the front lot, which was now compromised. Gray sedan, the person who'd walked in through the front entrance, possibly others she hadn't seen. She thought through what she had in her jacket pocket and what she'd left in the apartment and made the calculation fast. License, wallet, the USB drive, her phone. The laptop was still on the table. The evidence on the laptop was partially duplicated on the drive and partially backed up to an encrypted cloud folder she'd set up 2 weeks ago for reasons exactly like this one. She could leave the laptop. "Do you have your car?" she said to Tara. "Down the block. I didn't want to park in the lot." Smart, Nora thought. Either Tara Beckwith was more careful than she looked, or she'd had enough experience with Drell's people to have learned caution the hard way. They walked without talking until they reached Tara's car. A battered pickup truck, which was practical and anonymous in this part of Nebraska in a way that a sedan wasn't. Nora got in the passenger side. Tara started the engine and pulled out without asking where to go, which Nora appreciated. "Drive west," Nora said. "Get on the highway. Don't stop for 15 minutes. Tara drove. Nora watched the mirrors. Nothing followed them off the block. After 5 minutes on the highway, Tara said, "They came back to my clinic." "When?" "Tonight, before I drove here. I got a call from my office manager. She'd gone back to pick up something she forgot, and there were 2 men in the parking lot. She said they weren't trying to get in, they were just there, sitting." Tara's hands were tight on the wheel. "She left and called me. I'd already been trying to reach you for 3 days. "Why me?" "Because Priya said you were the one who was asking questions, and because—" She stopped, exhaled. "Because I found something at the clinic and I don't know who else to take it to." Nora turned to look at her directly. "What did you find?" Tara reached into her jacket pocket with one hand, keeping her eyes on the road, and pulled out a folded paper. She held it out. Nora took it and unfolded it in the glow of the dashboard. It was a packing slip. A Meridian Supply packing slip, dated 8 weeks ago, for a delivery to Dunmore Family Health Clinic. The quantities were standard. What wasn't standard was the handwritten note in the margin. Same initialing system she'd seen in the Hartwell logs, MD, but next to a column of item numbers that she didn't recognize as standard pharmaceutical line codes. She pulled out her phone and cross-referenced 2 of the codes against the Meridian Public Product Catalog she'd downloaded 3 days ago. Neither code appeared in the catalog. Off-catalog items. Moving through legitimate delivery infrastructure under line codes that weren't attached to any listed product. She looked at the quantities next to those codes. Looked at them again. "Tara," she said, "how long has Meridian been delivering to your clinic?" "About 2 years. And before the break-in last week, had you ever seen a packing slip with those item codes?" A pause. "I don't usually check the packing slips," Tara said. "My office manager handles receiving. She found that one behind a filing cabinet when she was cleaning. She thought it had slid back there, so it was dated 8 weeks ago." "Did you tell anyone else you had it?" "No, Tara's jaw tightened. "I was scared. I've been scared since the night they stopped me on the county road. I tried to file a complaint and nothing happened, and then the break-in, and then tonight, and I just—" She stopped again. "I didn't know if the right people were the right people, if you know what I mean." Nora knew exactly what she meant. She photographed the packing slip with her phone, 4 overlapping frames to capture every margin note, then folded it back and held it out. Tara shook her head. "You keep it," she said. "I don't want it in my clinic." Bob. They drove for another 20 minutes before Nora had Tara pull off at a truck stop, with enough vehicles in the lot to make them unremarkable. She got out and stood at the edge of the lot and called Garrett. It was close to midnight. He answered on the second ring. "I've been moved," she said. "Surveillance escalated to building entry tonight. I have a second witness, Tara Beckwith, clinic nurse from Dunmore, and I have a packing slip with off-catalog Meridian line codes showing non-standard product movement through a legitimate delivery to her clinic." A silence, longer than his usual silences. "Off-catalog how?" he said. "Codes that don't exist in their public product listing. High-quantity entries, moving alongside standard pharmaceutical deliveries and being logged through the same receiving process." "You have it documented?" "Photographed. Also the Hartwell delivery log discrepancies, Drell's initials on the margin adjustments, and a corporate link between Elk Basin Holdings and a dissolved LLC that Sandra Hargrove, Hartwell's director of nursing operations, was a founding member of." Another silence. "Garrett," she said, "what's the DEA's current position on the Elk Basin file?" "Still reopening. It's not fast." "They need to make it fast," she said, "because tonight escalated. They moved on me and they moved on Beckwith in the same evening, which means they're consolidating and they're not being careful about it anymore, which means they think they're close to done or they're panicking. Either way, the window for passive documentation is closing." "I hear you," he said. "I need you to send me everything, all of it, right now, tonight." "Already uploading to the encrypted folder," she said. "You'll have it in 10 minutes. Where are you going to be?" She looked at the truck stop, the highway, the flat black land in all directions. "I'll figure something out," she said. "Nora, I'll be careful." She hung up and went back to the truck. Tara was sitting with the engine off and the heat running down, and she looked like a person who had been frightened for long enough that the fright had gone past the point of visible expression and settled into something that looked almost like calm, but wasn't. "Do you have somewhere you can go?" Nora asked. "Not your house. Somewhere they don't know." "My sister lives in Kearney." "Go there. Tonight. Don't go back to the clinic or your house first. Call your office manager in the morning and tell her to take a few days off. Don't explain why." Tara looked at her. "Are you going to tell me who you actually are?" she said. "Because Priya said you were a nurse, and I believe that. But the way you've been moving tonight is not—" "I am a nurse," Nora said. "I've also been other things." "What kind of other things?" "The kind that are useful right now." She held Tara's gaze. "The kind that mean you can go to your sister's house tonight and sleep, and I'm going to handle this." Tara looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once the way people nodded when they needed to believe something and had decided to go ahead and believe it. "Don't get hurt," Tara said. "Working on it," Nora said. She got out of the truck, watched Tara pull back onto the highway, heading west, and then stood alone in the truck stop lot with her jacket zipped and her phone in her hand and the wind off the flat Nebraska plain doing what it always did, which was remind everything standing in it that it was there. Then she started thinking. She checked into a motel 6 miles from the truck stop, paid cash, used a name that was not hers and that she had documentation for, which was one of the things she had kept from her other life that she had told herself she kept only because the documentation existed, and getting rid of it seemed wasteful. The room was the way motel rooms at this price point always were, the particular combination of water stain and old carpet smell that communicated accurately that no one who had a better option was here. She didn't care. She sat on the edge of the bed and worked through everything she had, building it out on her phone in a document that was already uploading in real time to the encrypted folder. The picture that was assembling itself was cleaner than she'd expected and uglier than she'd hoped. Meridian Supply was either the origin point or a compromised link in a diversion pipeline that was pulling controlled substances out of legitimate medical supply chains before they reached receiving facilities. The volume suggested this had been running for close to 18 months, which lined up exactly with Elk Basin Holdings, with Hargrove's dissolved LLC, with the first of Drell's pattern stops. The off-catalog line codes on Tara's packing slip indicated that the pipeline wasn't just skimming existing shipments. It was also moving product that wasn't listed anywhere, which pointed toward either a secondary source or a manufacturing component that she couldn't see yet. Drell's role was infrastructure and suppression. He managed the county road corridor because the Elk Basin property sat on it, probably as a staging or transfer point. He managed the receiving paperwork at Hartwell because Hargrove gave him access. He managed the people who got too close by flagging them early, assessing the threat level, and deploying whatever level of response the situation required. A warning, a false complaint, a suspension, or, when those failed, escalation to direct surveillance and building entry. What she didn't have was the upstream. Who ran Elk Basin? Who the man in the suit was? The county compliance liaison who'd walked the medication storage rooms. Whether Meridian Supplies Management was involved, or whether the pipeline ran through someone inside the company without corporate knowledge. She sent everything she had to Garrett at 1:17 a.m., and then lay down on the motel bed without taking off her shoes and looked at the water stain on the ceiling and did not sleep. At 4:30 a.m., her phone vibrated. Not Garrett. A number she recognized this time, Priya. The text said, "Something happened at the hospital. Nora, I don't know what to do. There's been an overdose, a patient, and they're saying it was nursing error." She sat up. "Who's they?" she typed back. The reply came in under a minute. "Hargrove, she's here." At 4 a.m. She called the attending herself. She's saying the medication administration record shows an error on a recent shift. "Nora, they're saying your name." Nora was on her feet and putting on her jacket before the text finished loading. Not a nursing error. She knew it wasn't a nursing error because she knew her own documentation, and she knew the difference between a genuine administration mistake and a paper record that had been adjusted to look like one. What Hargrove was doing at 4 in the morning, standing in the emergency department of a hospital, she managed, pointing at a medication administration record and saying a suspended nurse's name, was building the second layer of the frame. The first layer had been the controlled substance discrepancy. That had cost Nora her access. The second layer, a patient overdose attributed to her, was designed to cost her her license, possibly her freedom. She called Garrett. He answered in 2 rings. "They're escalating the frame," she said. "Patient overdose at Hartwell, they're attributing it to my medication administration. I've been on suspension for 10 days. I haven't been in that hospital. I have no access." Which means the record was altered, or created from scratch. Hargrove's on site right now at 4 in the morning, which is not a thing administrators do for genuine nursing errors, and it tells me they made a decision tonight, when surveillance failed and I moved, to shift from suppression to elimination. They're going to try to arrest me before I can get the evidence to anyone who matters. How long do you think you have? She thought about that honestly. Hours, she said. Maybe less. Drell can push the county sheriff's department to move fast if he has Hargrove co-signing a complaint. He doesn't need the full evidentiary standard at the arrest stage. "Okay," Garrett said. "Listen to me. The DEA field office supervisor in Omaha, his name is Reyes. I've been on the phone with him for the last 2 hours. He has your documentation, he's reviewing it now, and he understands the timeline. What he needs the physical evidence," she said. "The packing slip. The original delivery logs, and he needs them before Drell moves on you." She pulled her jacket tighter and looked at the motel room door. "The logs are in Hartwell's receiving office," she said. "I can't walk into the hospital." "No," Garrett agreed. "Priya can." Is she willing to take that risk? Nora thought about Priya in the diner booth, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, asking, "Are you going to tell me who you actually are?" Thought about Priya at 4 in the morning, texting her from a hospital hallway about a frame that was being constructed around a colleague she believed in. "I think so," she said. "Yes." "Then you need to move fast, because Reyes says if he can get physical evidence into federal hands before the state arrest warrant is processed, he can freeze the county action. It has to be in his hands, though, not mine. His." "How far is Reyes from Grover Mills?" "He's already moving," Garrett said. "He has a field team. He can be at a designated point outside the county line in 90 minutes. 90 minutes. She looked at her watch, 4:42 a.m. "Tell him I'll be there," she said. She hung up and called Priya. Priya answered on the first ring. She was clearly still at the hospital because Nora could hear the ambient sound of the ED in the background. The PA system, the soft machinery of a place that never fully went quiet. "Are you safe?" Priya asked first. "Yes. I need you to do something, and it has to be right now. Okay. No hesitation. The word was flat and immediate, and Nora felt something shift behind her sternum that she didn't have time to examine. The receiving office, lower level, next to the loading dock. The filing cabinet against the back wall, second drawer. Delivery logs. I need the originals for the 6 most recent Tuesday deliveries from Meridian Supply. The whole packets. Invoices. Signature pages. Margin adjustment sheets. Everything that's clipped together. A pause. Then, the receiving office is locked at night. The key ring for the lower level is in Tolliver's desk drawer. He showed me where he kept it 6 months ago when I had to cover a delivery because the charge supervisor called out. Tolliver's on shift right now, Priya said. I know. Can you get the keys without... He went to the break room 15 minutes ago, Priya said. He usually takes 20 minutes. Another pause. I'm walking to his desk right now. Don't talk. Nora didn't talk. She listened to the ambient sound of the hospital, to Priya's footsteps, to a drawer opening, to a soft metallic jingle, to footsteps again. Then, I have them. Receiving office, lower level, go. She listened for 4 minutes to the sound of Priya moving through the hospital, the elevator, the hallway, the specific sound of a fire door opening, and then a key in a lock, and the creak of an unfamiliar door. Filing cabinet, Nora said. Second drawer. She heard the drawer. There's a lot of... Priya started. Meridian Supply. The tab will say Meridian. The last 6 Tuesday files. A rustling. A pause. I have them, Priya said, and her voice had gone slightly uneven in a way that told Nora she was only now fully understanding what she was doing. Good. Put them inside your scrub top. Go back upstairs. Don't go near Hargrove. I need you to walk out of the hospital in the next 30 minutes and bring them to me. Where are you? Nora gave her the motel address. Priya, she said. What you just did, that's the thing that ends this. Don't tell me that until it's actually ended, Priya said, and hung up. Nora stood in the motel room for a moment. Then she started moving, gathering the few things she'd brought in, checking the window, checking the door. She pulled up a map on her phone and plotted the county line point that Garrett had described, running the timing. Priya needed 30 minutes. Nora needed 45 to reach the meet point from here. It was tight. If Drell moved to process the warrant before 7, which was when the county courthouse opened but not when a county sheriff's department stopped operating, it could get tighter. She was lacing her second shoe when her phone rang. Unknown number. Not the same unknown as before. Different last 4 digits. She answered. The voice on the other end was not Drell. It was a voice she didn't recognize, male, older, with the particular flat Midwestern diction of someone who had spent decades choosing words carefully for professional reasons. Ms. Voss, the voice said, I think you and I should have a conversation before this gets any messier than it already is. She kept her voice level. Who is this? Someone who has considerably more investment in Elk Basin Holdings than Officer Drell does, the voice said. Someone who would prefer a quiet resolution to an escalating one. You're calling me, she said, at 4:50 in the morning. I'm calling you because you're smarter than the people I hired to manage this situation, and they've made it worse, and I'd like to stop it from becoming a problem that neither of us can walk away from. She thought about the man in the suit, the county compliance liaison, the one Priya hadn't recognized, the one Hargrove had introduced without a name. What kind of quiet resolution? She said. The kind where the documentation you've gathered disappears, the personnel issues at Hartwell get resolved in your favor, and you continue your nursing career without any further complications. She held the phone and looked at the motel door and thought about Tara Beckwith driving west to her sister's house and Priya walking through a hospital basement with 6 weeks of delivery logs hidden under her scrubs. And in exchange, she said. In exchange, the voice said, you make one call to whatever federal contact you've been speaking with. You tell them you were mistaken, that the discrepancies were procedural, not criminal, that you've reviewed the documentation more carefully and you're withdrawing your concern. A beat. That's a very specific ask, she said, from someone who claims not to know what I've already sent. A silence on the other end. Brief, but real. She had him. You already know I've sent it, she said. So you know this call is not about making it go away. This call is about finding out how much I've held back and whether there's still a version of this where the federal review doesn't reach you specifically. The voice on the other end said nothing. You should know, she said, that I haven't held anything back. She hung up, and then stood perfectly still in the motel room as the full weight of what that call meant settled over her. Because a man with that kind of voice, making that kind of offer at 5 a.m, was not a person who accepted the word no without a follow-up response. He had resources that Drell didn't have. He had reach that went past a county sheriff's department and a hospital administrator. And he had just confirmed by making that call that the federal documentation had gotten somewhere important enough to scare him, but also that he had access to information about her movements that went past whatever Drell's team had been running, which meant there was a fourth player she hadn't identified yet. She picked up her bag and moved to the door and opened it onto the pre-dawn parking lot, where the cold came in hard and the sky was still fully dark. And somewhere out on the county road between her and the hospital and the county line, 3 different forces were converging on the same 6 weeks of paper, and she was the only one who knew where all of them were. She stepped outside. Across the parking lot, parked at the far end with its lights off and its engine running, was a black SUV that had not been there when she checked in. She didn't freeze. She assessed. Black SUV, engine running, lights off, parked at an angle that gave the driver a clean view of the motel room door. It had not been there 3 hours ago. It was there now. Those were the facts, and the facts pointed toward one of 2 things. Drell's people, who had tracked her to the motel through methods she hadn't fully anticipated, or the man with the flat Midwestern voice, who had demonstrated resources that went past what a county sheriff's deputy could deploy. Either way, standing in the doorway was worse than moving. She went right instead of straight across the lot, using the row of parked vehicles as partial cover, moving at a pace that was not running but covered ground. Her phone was already in her hand. She typed Garrett's number by touch without looking at the screen, got it wrong twice because her hands were cold, got it right on the 3rd try, and pressed call as she cleared the end of the parking row and hit the service road that ran behind the motel property. He answered immediately, which told her he hadn't slept either. Black SUV at the motel, she said, low and walking. I don't know if it's county or the 4th player. 4th player, he said, and the way he said it told her he already knew what she meant. We flagged a second asset in the county network 2 hours ago. Not law enforcement, private, ex-law enforcement, probably. The surveillance pattern was too clean for Drell's team. Who's running them? We're working on it. Get off the property. I'm off it, she said, and stepped over a drainage ditch onto a gravel access lane that ran alongside the motel's back fence. Priya Anand called the number you gave her, Garrett said. She's 10 minutes from the motel. Tell her not to come to the motel. Tell her... She looked up, oriented herself against the glow of the highway a quarter-mile north. There's a gas station on the highway north of here, the one with the yellow sign. I'll relay it. Garrett, the man who called me, the 4th player, he knew I'd been in contact with federal channels. He knew it specifically enough to ask me to make a retraction call. That means he has a source that's either inside the DEA pipeline or inside yours. A silence. Not long, but real. I know, he said. You know. We identified an information leak in the Omaha field office at approximately 3 this morning. It's being contained. Reyes is clean. It's below him. But it means they had a window of approximately 5 hours during which our communication with the field office was potentially visible. 5 hours. The window during which the surveillance had escalated to building entry, the frame at Hartwell had been activated, the 4th player had gotten her motel location, and the offer call had been made. 5 hours was enough to do a lot of damage if you moved fast and had the infrastructure for it. How contained is contained, she said. Enough. Reyes has moved his team to a secure channel. The meet point is still valid. A pause. Can you get to the gas station? She could see the yellow sign from where she was standing. Yes, she said. 12 minutes, he said, and disconnected. Priya was already at the gas station when Nora reached it, standing outside her car in the cold with her arms wrapped around herself, and the particular expression of a person who has done something irreversible and is waiting to find out whether it was the right thing. She was still in her scrubs. She had driven straight from the hospital. She held out the delivery logs when she saw Nora approach, a thick packet of papers slightly crumpled from being carried against her body, with the Meridian Supply header visible on the top sheet. "Is this enough?" she said. "Yes," Nora said, and took them. "The patient," Priya said. The overdose Hargrove was flagging. "I checked before I left." She paused. "It was a genuine adverse reaction. Wrong dosage, but it wasn't—" She stopped. "The administration record Hargrove was pointing at. I looked at it. The handwriting on the correction entry is not yours." "I know." "It's not anyone's from our floor. I've worked with everyone on our floor for years. I know all their handwriting." Priya's voice was steady but thin. "Hargrove added that entry herself, didn't she?" "I think so," Nora said. "We'll be able to prove it." "How?" "Because document examiners can date ink entries relative to the surrounding paper, and because Hargrove made the same mistake all forgers make, she was too careful. The handwriting will be more controlled than a genuine rushed administration note, and the ink density will be inconsistent with the rest of the page because she was pressing harder than necessary." She looked at Priya. "I've seen this before." Priya looked at her for a moment. "In nursing?" she said. "No," Nora said. A car pulled into the gas station and they both went still. But it was a civilian, a man in a work jacket, who went straight to the pump without looking at them. Nora let out a breath she hadn't noticed she was holding. "There's a federal agent meeting me at the county line," she said. "I need to go. Priya, go home. Don't go back to the hospital today. If Hargrove or anyone from the sheriff's department contacts you, you say nothing and you call this number." She pulled up Garrett's contact and showed Priya the screen. "Write it down." Priya wrote it on the back of a gas receipt from her car's cup holder. "Will you be okay?" she asked. "Yes." "You keep saying that." "It keeps being true," Nora said. Priya looked at her for another second, then pulled her into a brief, slightly awkward hug that caught Nora off guard because she hadn't anticipated it, and held on for a moment longer than was comfortable, and then stepped back. "Come back to the hospital," Priya said, "when this is done. We need you on that floor." Nora didn't say anything to that. She put the delivery logs under her arm and walked to the highway. But she had a problem, which was that her car was still in the motel lot with a black SUV sitting on it, and she had no vehicle, and the county line was 12 miles away. She solved the first part of this by doing something she hadn't done in years. She stood at the edge of the highway and flagged down a semi that was rolling west at a moderate speed, and the driver, a middle-aged woman with a thermos of coffee and no particular interest in Nora's reasons, let her ride as far as the county line highway exit without asking a single question. Nora was grateful for that in a way she didn't have the words for, sitting in the passenger seat of the cab with the delivery logs on her lap and the USB drive in her pocket, and the flat Nebraska land moving past in the first gray light before sunrise. The driver let her off at the exit ramp and pulled back onto the highway. Nora walked down the ramp and stood at the county line marker, which was a standard green signboard on a steel post that said Grover Mills County in reflective letters, and waited. The DEEA vehicle arrived 4 minutes later. 2 of them, actually. A standard-issue dark sedan and a larger vehicle behind it that had the profile of something with more equipment than a road trip required. They pulled onto the shoulder, and a man got out of the first car who was somewhere in his early 50s, heavier than he looked in movement, with a face that had spent enough time outdoors to carry a permanent weather line. He had the gait of someone who had been doing this specific job for long enough to have left the urgency of it behind and replaced it with something more like precision. "Voss?" he said. "Reyes," she said. He looked at the packet under her arm. "That the Hartwell logs?" "Those and additional documentation. I also have photographed evidence on my phone that I'll transmit directly to your secure address once you give it to me, and a physical packing slip from the Dunmore Clinic currently in the possession of Tara Beckwith in Kearney." "We'll get someone to Beckwith," he said. He held out his hand for the logs. She gave them to him and watched him pass them immediately to the person who had gotten out of the second vehicle, a younger woman with a field kit who started photographing each page before the packet was fully handed over. The fourth player? Nora said. The man who called me at 4:50 this morning. I didn't recognize the voice. Older, flat regional diction, used to being in charge. He's the Elk Basin principal. We have a name, Reyes said. We've had a partial for 2 weeks, but your documentation connected the corporate trail. Man named Aldous Farr. 61, semi-retired, ran a county health administration board for 12 years. Left it 4 years ago and went into private consulting. He paused. The dissolved LLC, the one with the Hargrove connection, he was the silent funder. Aldous Farr. She filed the name. He has a private intelligence asset running surveillance in the county, she said. Ex-law enforcement, per your assessment. They found the motel. We know. We've identified the vehicle. It's being tracked. Reyes looked at her steadily. You should know we're moving on Elk Basin this morning, 3 hours from now, with county line jurisdiction established and state AG coordination. We have enough with what you've given us to execute the warrant. She exhaled, not from relief exactly, more like the release of a held position. Drell will run, she said. He won't get far. We have eyes on him. And Hargrove. She's at Hartwell right now. She's not going anywhere. He paused. The altered medication record will need to get into the hospital's document management system. You'll find the original entry and the edited version in the audit log, she said. Hospital document systems maintain edit histories even when the edits are made on the physical chart, because the physical chart gets scanned and uploaded. The upload timestamp and the edit timestamp will be different, and the edit occurred after my suspension, which means my credentials weren't used. Reyes looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite approval, but something in the middle. Garrett said you had training beyond the nursing, he said. I have training, she said, and didn't add anything to it. She did not go back to the motel. Reyes had his team establish a temporary field position at a county highway maintenance facility 1/2 mile from the Elk Basin property, and Nora sat in the back of the second vehicle with a cup of coffee that someone had produced from somewhere and watched the radio traffic, and did the thing she had always been better at than most people gave her credit for, which was waiting without it costing her. At 7:43 a.m., the warrant team moved on Elk Basin Holdings. She wasn't there for it. She stayed at the maintenance facility and heard it through the radio. The initial entry, the clearing of the structure, the contact call that came back 11 minutes in when the team lead reported what they'd found inside the low metal building with the corrugated roof. A secondary staging area, palletized pharmaceutical stock with no legitimate facility markings, packaging equipment, temperature-controlled storage units. The off-catalog items from Tara's packing slip weren't off-catalog at all. They were repackaged product, legitimate pharmaceuticals stripped of their original documentation and repackaged for secondary sale through channels that didn't involve any of the receiving facilities Meridian supplied. The volume was larger than she'd estimated, considerably larger. She sat with that for a moment and drank her bad coffee and thought about 31 medical facilities across 4 counties, and how many of them had margin adjustments in their delivery logs with 2 initialed letters, and how many patients in those facilities had received medications in amounts that were slightly less than what was prescribed, because slightly less was what arrived after the cut was taken. It made her tired in a way that had nothing to do with the night she'd just had. At 9:15, Reyes came back to the vehicle with his jacket undone and his phone in his hand and the look of a person who was managing multiple simultaneous developments and doing it adequately. Drell is in custody, he said. He was at his residence. Didn't run. I think he didn't know we were moving yet. He looked at his phone. Hargrove is being detained at Hartwell pending interview. She's asked for a lawyer, which is her right. Farr, Nora said. That's the current problem, he said, and she heard in his voice something that wasn't quite hesitation, but was in the neighborhood of it. He's not at his residence, she said. He left last night. We believe before you received his call. He was already in motion. He has a property in western Iowa and a flight history that indicates he uses small private airstrips. She thought about the call, the measured voice, the specific ask, the knowledge of her federal contact, the offer framed as conversation. He hadn't called her to negotiate. He'd called her to buy himself time. He'd already known by the time he picked up the phone that the situation was past salvaging through containment, and the call had been a way of keeping her attention on the conversation while he finished whatever he needed to finish and moved. "He used the call to buy time," she said. "Yes, we believe so." "How long has he been moving?" "Estimate puts him 4 to 6 hours ahead of us." Reyes sat down on the edge of the vehicle's rear platform. "Iowa State Police are coordinating. We have his vehicle description and his known contacts in the area." He looked at her. "We'll find him." She believed him. She also knew what 4 to 6 hours meant in terms of travel options. If a person had resources and had been planning for the possibility of exactly this moment. "The leak in the Omaha field office," she said. "How far up did his access go?" "Far enough to tell him you'd contacted federal channels. Not far enough to give him Garrett's identity or the full content of your documentation." Reyes paused. "The individual involved has been removed from the case." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The private surveillance asset, the ex-law enforcement person running the SUV. Do you have them?" "Vehicle was abandoned at a truck stop east of the county line at approximately 5 this morning." "Gone." "Along with Farr, or independently?" "Someone else who had calculated the exit window and taken it." She put down her coffee cup and looked out the vehicle's open rear door at the flat country, the pale light of a Nebraska morning that had arrived unremarkably while the rest of it was happening. A hawk was doing something on a fence post 100 yards out, and the wind was moving the dead grass in the field, and the mundaneness of all of it next to what had just occurred in that metal building down the road was the kind of contrast that she had never fully gotten used to, in any context, in any place she'd been. At 11:30 a.m., she got a ride back to Grover Mills in one of Reyes's vehicles. The driver was a young agent who didn't try to make conversation, which she appreciated. They pulled into Hartwell Regional's parking lot, and she sat in the car for a moment looking at the building. Hargrove had been taken out through the administrative entrance 90 minutes earlier, according to Reyes' radio traffic. One of the nurses who'd been on the early shift had filmed it on a phone, and the clip had already been shared enough within the hospital that it was, as these things went, effectively public. Nora had heard the radio traffic and knew that Hargrove had walked out flanked by 2 investigators, with her face set in the particular rigid blankness of a person who had decided that expression was the only thing still under their control. Nora got out of the car and walked into the emergency department through the ambulance bay, because that was the entrance she always used. The overnight charge nurse, Tolliver, was still there, technically past the end of his shift, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. Something open, slightly uncertain. "Voss?" he said. "Tolliver?" she said. "You look terrible." "I haven't slept." He nodded. Then he held out the charge sheet clipboard, the daily operational document that the charge nurse carried as a matter of ritual authority. "We're short," he said. My credentials are suspended," she said. "Reinstatement paperwork is on the administrator's desk," he said. "Interim administrator. Hargrove's—" He stopped, made a gesture that communicated everything. She looked at the clipboard. "I need an hour first," she said. "I need to sleep. The call room's empty." She took the call room. She set an alarm for 60 minutes, lay down on the narrow bed without taking her shoes off, and was asleep inside of 4 minutes, which was a skill she had built in environments where sleep was a resource to be managed like any other, taken when available and not counted on to last. She dreamed of nothing, or if she did, she didn't remember it. The alarm woke her at 12:47 p.m. She washed her face in the call room sink and looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, tired, slightly hollow around the eyes, the particular drained look of someone who had run a long way on insufficient fuel. She looked, she thought, like a person who had been through something, which was accurate and which she was fine with, because the alternative to having been through something was not having made it through. She was about to leave the call room when her phone rang. "Reyes." "We have Farr," he said. She stopped. Iowa State Police intercepted him at a private airstrip outside of Council Bluffs. He'd filed a flight plan to Canada under a registered charter company he had partial ownership of. A pause. "He was cooperative at the point of contact, which in my experience means he has a lawyer who told him cooperation was his best option." "It's not," she said. No, Reyes agreed. It's not. What he has is 18 months of documented pharmaceutical diversion, a shell company network, a corrupted law enforcement asset, a compromised hospital administrator, and an altered medical record. Cooperation might get him a better sentence. It's not going to get him out of it. She leaned against the call room wall. The private surveillance asset, she said. Still outstanding. We have a lead. It'll take a few more days. Okay, she said. Voss, Reyes said. I want to say, the documentation you built, the chain you established under the conditions you built it under. It's what made this prosecutable. You should know that. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, Thank you for moving when you did. Thank Garrett, Reyes said. He pushed hard. She would. She ended the call and stood in the call room for another moment. Then she opened the door, walked back out to the emergency department, and held out her hand for Tolliver's clipboard. He gave it to her without comment. She looked down at the patient board. 6 active cases, 2 pending triage, 1 awaiting imaging, and felt the particular quality of attention settle over her that the work always produced. Everything else narrowing, the shape of what needed to be done becoming clear and specific and immediate. She handed the clipboard back. Bay 2 first, she said. Chest pain, Tolliver said. 63-year-old male came in 40 minutes ago. She walked toward Bay 2. She was 3 steps down the hall when the trauma pager on the charge desk went off, and Tolliver read it and looked up, and his face did something complicated. Multi-vehicle, he said. County Road 11. 6 injured, 2 critical. ETA 9 minutes. County Road 11. The same road. The same stretch she'd been pulled over on. The same corridor she'd spent the last 2 weeks dismantling piece by piece, and now it was sending her patients. Get me 2 more nurses on the floor, she said, already moving. And someone call the attending. She pushed through the trauma bay door, and behind her she could hear the department coming to life. The calls going out, the equipment moving, the specific organized urgency of a team that had work to do. She didn't look back. There wasn't time to look back. And looking back had never been something she was good at anyway. She was pulling on gloves when her phone buzzed one more time. She almost ignored it. But the number wasn't Reyes, and it wasn't Garrett, and it wasn't Priya. It was a number she hadn't seen in 14 months. The number attached to a person who shouldn't have known she was in Grover Mills. A person who shouldn't have known she existed under this name. She looked at the message. It said, We need to talk about why you left. There are things you don't know. The program didn't end when you walked out. She put the phone face down on the supply cart and snapped her second glove into place. Whatever that message meant, and she already knew, in the back of her mind, the particular cold shape of what it meant. It was going to have to wait 9 minutes. Because in 9 minutes, there would be 6 people coming through that trauma bay door who had not asked to be on County Road 11 this morning, and they would need everything she had. And she had learned a long time ago that the thing about being a person who could do 2 difficult things was that you still had to do them one at a time. The first ambulance arrived in 8 minutes, not 9. 2 critical, the pager had said. The first was a 47-year-old man who had been driving a pickup westbound when a delivery truck ran a stop sign and caught him on the driver's side at approximately 40 miles per hour. He came in with a GCS of 12, dropping, with a left side chest deformity that told her before she got her hands on him that he had at minimum 3 fractured ribs and a strong probability of pneumothorax. She called the assessment aloud for the attending, Dr. Marcia Wills, who had arrived 60 seconds before the ambulance and was already gowned, and moved to vascular access while Wills did the primary survey. The second critical was a teenage girl, 16, passenger in a second vehicle that had been caught in the chain reaction. She was conscious and terrified and had a mid-shaft femur fracture that was losing blood faster than her pressure could afford. Nora got a line in her left AC while talking to her steadily. Not the falsely cheerful talk that some nurses used as a kind of sonic wallpaper, but direct, informative talk, the kind that actually helped. I'm Nora. I'm your nurse. I need you to squeeze my hand if anything I do hurts more than it already does. The girl squeezed twice during the IV placement, and Nora acknowledged it both times without stopping. The next 40 minutes were the kind of 40 minutes that didn't leave room for anything that wasn't right in front of you. The man with the chest injury went to CT and came back with a confirmed hemothorax and went up to surgery inside of 20 minutes. which was faster than usual and which happened because Wills pushed hard, and Nora had the pre-op documentation ready before Wills finished asking for it. The teenage girl went to orthopedic stabilization with 2 units of packed red cells running and her pressure trending in the right direction. Not good, but better than it had been on arrival, which was what mattered in the next hour. The other 4 were less critical and more complicated in the way that medium-severity trauma was always more complicated. More variables, more decisions about imaging versus observation, more patients who were stable enough to ask questions and frightened enough that the questions didn't stop. Nora moved through all of it. She didn't feel the tiredness in the way she might have expected to. There was something about the work itself that reorganized her. Not energized, exactly. That wasn't quite the right word. More like clarified. The noise went down, and what remained was what needed doing. By the time the department settled back into its baseline-controlled chaos at a little past 2 in the afternoon, she had been awake for approximately 34 hours. She went to the break room and sat down and looked at her phone. The message was still there. She read it again. "We need to talk about why you left. There are things you don't know. The program didn't end when you walked out. The number belonged to a man named Victor Slade, which was a name she had spent 14 months not thinking about with the kind of disciplined deliberateness that was the only real alternative to thinking about it constantly. Slade had been her direct supervisor in the last 18 months of her time in the program, a special operations medical unit embedded within a federal task structure that she had entered at 23 and left at 26, for reasons that she had given officially as personal and left unofficially as something more specific and more complicated than that. She had left because she had seen something that the program told her she hadn't seen. She had reported it, been told she was mistaken, been reassigned, and then 6 weeks after the reassignment had submitted her separation paperwork with the clarity of someone who understood that the correct response to being told you didn't see what you saw was to leave before you saw anything else they'd need to tell you about. She had not spoken to Victor Slade since the morning she handed in her credentials. She called the number. He answered on the first ring. "Nora," he said. "How do you know where I am?" she said. Not a question exactly. More like the first step in an accounting. "Garrett flagged your contact through standard separation monitoring. I get a notification when a separated operative makes contact with an active federal channel." A pause. "I wasn't monitoring you specifically. It's automated. And the message. The message is what it says it is." His voice was the same, careful, measured, with the slight roughness of someone who smoked infrequently but consistently. The program didn't end. It changed structure. And some of what it changed into, he stopped. "What you reported before you left. You weren't wrong." She was quiet for a moment. "I know I wasn't wrong," she said. "I know you know. I'm telling you we know now too." Another pause. "There are people who owe you an answer. I'm one of them. I'd like the opportunity to give it to you in person at a time that is not the middle of whatever you've been handling in Grover Mills." She looked at the break room wall. Someone had taped up a staff schedule and a reminder about the biohazard disposal procedure and a photograph from a department holiday party, a little crooked, showing 6 people in scrubs making faces at the camera with plastic cups raised. "I'm not leaving Hartwell right now," she said. "I know. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to pick a time when you're ready and contact me." A beat. "That's all, Nora. No operational request, no recall, just a conversation that should have happened 3 years ago." She thought about that. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's enough," he said, and the call ended. She sat with it for a moment. Then she put the phone down on the break room table and made herself a cup of coffee and drank it while it was still too hot, which she had always done, and which her sister had always told her was going to damage her esophagus eventually. She thought about the program and what she'd seen and what she'd been told she hadn't seen. And she thought about Victor Slade's voice saying you weren't wrong. And she thought about the distance between the 23-year-old who had walked into that program and the 28-year-old sitting in this break room right now. The distance was not straight. It had corners in it that she didn't always look at directly, but she was, she thought, in a better position to look at them than she had been 14 months ago. Maybe that was the thing about Grover Mills. Maybe that was what it had done that she hadn't expected it to do. She finished the coffee and went back to work. The public accounting of what had happened in Grover Mills took weeks to fully surface, which was how these things always went. The arrest was one day, the picture assembled itself over the days and weeks after, and the full shape of it only became visible once the investigators had gone through everything and the lawyers had started talking and the court documents had started hitting the public record. Aldous Farr was charged with 18 counts, the most significant of which were conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The volume of diverted pharmaceuticals that the Elk Basin operation had moved over 18 months was ultimately calculated at approximately 340,000 dosage units across multiple drug classes, with an estimated street value that the DEA's press statement converted into a number that local news outlets put in their headlines in large font. He pled not guilty at arraignment. His lawyer filed 4 pretrial motions in the first 2 weeks. None of them changed the weight of what Nora had documented, or what the Elk Basin storage facility had contained, or what the Meridian supply chain analysis showed once federal investigators got into the company's own records and found that the diversion had been running with the knowledge of one senior logistics manager who was separately charged. Marcus Drell was charged with misconduct in office, evidence tampering, abuse of authority, and conspiracy. He was suspended without pay pending trial. The county sheriff issued a public statement that described the situation as a betrayal of public trust, and that used the phrase "we failed the community" in a way that was legally careful and emotionally minimal, the way institutional apologies always were. The 3 individuals who had filed complaints against Drell in the previous 14 months, complaints that had been reviewed and dismissed within 2 weeks of filing, received notification that their cases were being reopened and that the dismissals had been improper. Sandra Hargrove was charged with falsification of medical records, fraud, and conspiracy. The Altered Medication Administration record, the one bearing a correction entry in handwriting that was not Nora's and not anyone else's from the nursing floor, was analyzed by a forensic document examiner who identified ink density inconsistencies consistent with entries made under conditions of deliberate control rather than working urgency. The examiner's report was 22 pages. The relevant finding fit in one sentence. The entry was not contemporaneous with the surrounding record. Hargrove's lawyer released a statement. It said his client looked forward to presenting her defense. Nora read it once, noted the absence of any specific factual claim, and moved on. Hartwell Regional's board of directors convened an emergency session and appointed an interim director and issued a formal statement that included a paragraph about Nora specifically. The paragraph acknowledged that her administrative suspension had been initiated under false pretenses, that the controlled substance discrepancy attributed to her access log had been manufactured through external interference in the facility's receiving process, and that her nursing credentials had been fully reinstated effective the date of the investigation's initial findings. It used the word apologize twice, which she had not expected, and which she received in the spirit in which she assumed it was intended, which was genuine, if belated. Priya read her the statement over the phone, sitting in the break room between patients. "Does it feel like enough?" Priya asked. "No," Nora said, "but it's accurate." "That's not the same thing." "I know." She didn't say the other thing, which was that she had stopped expecting formal acknowledgement to feel like enough a long time ago. Not because acknowledgement didn't matter. It did. It mattered to the 3 people whose complaints against Drell had been dismissed. It mattered to Tara Beckwith, who reopened her clinic in Dunmore, 6 weeks after the arrest with a new lock on the receiving door, and according to Priya, who had gotten the information secondhand, a somewhat different expression than she'd had before, the expression of a person who had been frightened for a long time and had come out the other side of it into something harder and more clear-eyed. It mattered to the patients at 31 medical facilities who had received medications that were slightly less than prescribed because the margins had been shaved before delivery. It just didn't erase anything. It didn't work that way, and anyone who told you it did was selling something. What it did was create a record, a public, documented, legally entered record of what had happened and who had done it and what the consequences were. That was not nothing. In the world Nora had moved through, both the one she'd left and the one she was in now, records were not nothing. Records were what remained when the people involved were gone, And records were what protected the next person who stood on a dark county road while a man with a gun and a sneer decided they were a manageable problem. She thought about that sometimes. Reyes came back to Grover Mills once, 6 weeks after the arrests, to close out her formal witness documentation. They met in a conference room at Hartwell that smelled of fresh paint because the administrative suite had been partially refurbished since Hargrove's removal. He brought coffee from the cart in the lobby, which was better coffee than the break room produced, and they sat across from each other with the documentation spread between them and worked through it methodically. At the end, he looked at her with the particular expression she had learned to associate with people who had something to say and were deciding how directly to say it. "You know the private surveillance asset," he said, "the ex-law enforcement individual running the SUV." "You found them," she said. "Former state investigator, retired 8 years ago. His name doesn't matter. He's been cooperative. Full accounting." Reyes paused. In the course of that accounting, he mentioned that the instruction to escalate surveillance from passive to active was not Drell's call and not Farr's. It was passed through a separate channel. She looked at him. "What channel?" "Someone within the program you separated from," he said. "Not Slade. Below Slade. An individual who had a financial relationship with Farr predating the Elk Basin operation by approximately 2 years. She was quiet for a moment. "Someone from the program was invested in Farr's operation," she said. "That's what the accounting suggests. We're referring it. It's not DEA jurisdiction at that level." He looked at her steadily. "I think you should have that conversation with Slade." She had already been thinking that. "Yes," she said. "For what it's worth," Reyes said, putting the documentation back in order with the careful movements of someone who had done this particular task thousands of times. "The case you built, under the conditions you built it under, without institutional backing, without clearance to operate, and while being actively framed, is one of the cleaner evidence packages I've worked with, the chain of custody held at every link." She didn't deflect that. She had learned, slowly and imperfectly, that deflecting a true thing was its own kind of dishonesty. "Thank you," she said. "I mean it as a professional observation," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm not arguing with it." He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She called Victor Slade on a Thursday evening in April, sitting on the tailgate of her car in the Hartwell parking lot after a 12-hour shift, with the last of the day's light doing something specific and fleeting over the flat horizon that she made herself notice because she had made a practice in the last months of noticing things that were specifically and fleeting, having understood at some point in the Grover Mills winter that she had spent too many years moving through landscapes without looking at them. Slade answered, and they talked for 40 minutes. He told her what he hadn't told her 3 years ago, which was that the incident she'd reported, the one he'd told her she was mistaken about, had been real and had been covered internally to protect an ongoing operation, and that the cover had protected the wrong people, and that the individual within the program who had financial ties to Aldous Farr was now under review. He told her this with the particular careful precision of a person who was choosing honesty because it was correct and not because it was easy, and she listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she was quiet for a moment. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "Go ahead." "I'm not coming back to the program. That's not conditional on any of this. I'm telling you that because I want the answer I'm about to give you to be understood correctly." "Okay," he said. "What you just told me, I needed to hear it, not because I needed the validation, because I needed the complete picture, and for 3 years I've been operating with a picture that had a piece missing. Now I have the whole thing." She looked at the horizon. "That matters. It closes something." "I know," he said. "I should have." "Yes," she said. "You should have, but you didn't, and now you did, and I'm going to close it and move on." She paused. "If there's a referral process for what you described, the individual with the Farr connection, I'll cooperate with whatever documentation they need. That's not about the program. That's about the 31 facilities and the patients." "I'll pass that along," Slade said. She ended the call. sat on the tailgate for a few more minutes and watched the light finish what it was doing to the horizon, which was turning it the color of old copper, which was not a beautiful description but was accurate, and she had decided to prefer accuracy to beauty where she could. Then she got in the car and drove home. The letter from the Nebraska State Board of Nursing arrived on a Friday in May. It was formal and brief, as these letters tended to be, and it confirmed the full reinstatement of her nursing license with no conditions, no probationary period, and no record of the suspension attached to her licensure history. It also included, on a second page that she hadn't expected, a written commendation from the board acknowledging her role in identifying and documenting a pharmaceutical diversion scheme affecting multiple licensed healthcare facilities in the region, and the phrase conduct reflecting the highest standards of the nursing profession. She read that twice. Then she put the letter on the kitchen table and made coffee and stood at the window looking at the parking lot for a while. She thought about the night on County Road 11, the flashlight, the unsnapped holster. She thought about Marcus Drell looking at her in the wash of his cruiser's headlights and saying, "You don't look like someone who should be carrying that badge." She thought about what he had meant by that and what he had been wrong about and why he'd been wrong about it. He'd been wrong because he'd looked at her and seen the category: young woman, civilian clothes, hospital badge, alone on a dark road at 2 a.m. He'd seen the category and assumed the content. He hadn't needed to consider in his experience that the category might be the entire point, that the unremarkable exterior might be the result of considerable deliberate effort, that the person who didn't react to the flashlight in her face, who didn't flinch when the holster was unsnapped, who said, "I'm not nervous with the flat, simple accuracy of someone reporting a fact," that person might have spent years in environments where not reacting was the difference between living and not. He'd made the oldest mistake there was. He'd decided what he was looking at before he looked. She had encountered that mistake before him, and she would encounter it after him. And the thing she had understood somewhere in the last months was that encountering it wasn't something to be angry about. Or not only that, it was also information. It told you what someone was working with. It told you how they thought. And if you were patient and precise and willing to let them believe what they believed right up until the moment it no longer served you, to let them believe it, their mistake became the thing that undid them. She hadn't planned it that way on County Road 11. She hadn't known what she was stepping into. But when the situation had shown itself, she had done the thing she had always been capable of, which was seeing it clearly and responding to what was actually there rather than what she wished was there. That was, she thought, the most honest summary of who she was and what the last several months had been. Not a hero's story, not a triumph. A person with a specific set of skills and a specific set of limitations, encountering a situation that required her specific skills, doing the work imperfectly and under conditions that were frequently worse than she'd anticipated, and coming out the other side with the evidence intact and the patients protected and her name on a reinstatement letter from the state board. That was enough, more than enough. She poured her coffee and went to get ready for her shift. Priya was at the charge desk when Nora came in, and she looked up and looked back down at her chart and then looked up again with the expression of someone who had something to say and had been rehearsing it. "The board commendation," she said. "Tolliver put it up in the break room." "He didn't have to do that." "He printed it in color," Priya said, "on the good paper. He never uses the good paper." Nora looked toward the break room, then back at the patient board. "How's the census?" she said. "Full. 2 waiting for beds upstairs, 1 holding in bay 4, and there's a kid in triage who's been there for 40 minutes because the triage nurse called out sick, and Tolliver's been covering, but—" "I'll take triage," Nora said. She went to triage. She sat across from the kid, 7 years old, with a cut above his eyebrow from a fall at school that had bled impressively and scared his mother more than it had scared him, because 7-year-olds who didn't feel sick yet often took the situation more calmly than the adults in the room. She cleaned the wound and assessed it and told him he was going to need a few stitches, and he said, "Does it hurt?" And she said, "The numbing shot stings for about 3 seconds and then it doesn't." And he thought about that and said, "Okay." And she thought about the directness of children when they were given direct information instead of reassurance-shaped like information. And she thought it was one of the things she was best at in this job, and one of the reasons she had stayed in it even through the months when it had cost her considerably. She stayed in this work because it was real. Because when you got it right, someone lived or hurt less or went home to their family. And when you got it wrong, there were concrete consequences that demanded you do better. And because it required the full use of everything she was. Not the part of her that had been trained for operations, not the part that had learned to read surveillance patterns and build evidence chains and move through hostile environments without being noticed, but all of it together combined into something that was more complete than either half alone. That was who she was. Not a nurse who had been something else before. Not a former operative playing at civilian life. A person who contained both things, who had paid the price of carrying both things, and who had, slowly, imperfectly, over 14 months in a town she had chosen partly for its forgettability, found a way to let them occupy the same space without tearing her apart. She sutured the kid's eyebrow with 5 stitches, neat and even, and told him he was going to have a small scar that would probably look good when he was older. He said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes, actually," and he grinned with the gap where his front tooth had been and let his mother hold his hand again. She disposed of the materials, restocked the tray, moved to the next patient. She did not look back. The people who had tried to make her disappear were going to spend the next several years in courtrooms, and the record of what they had done and what it had cost real people in real hospital beds was going to be public and permanent and unchangeable. And she was going to keep showing up for her shifts, and keep doing the work, and keep being exactly what she had always been, which was the thing they had not taken seriously enough, right up until the moment it was too late to do anything about it. That was the only kind of victory that had ever meant anything to her. Not the dramatic moment, not the public recognition, the fact of still being here, still doing the work, still being the person they had decided wasn't worth paying attention to. The quietest victories were the ones that lasted. And she had learned, through everything, through all of it, that the person others chose to overlook was never as safe to overlook as they assumed. She had known that about herself for a long time. Now Grover Mills knew it too.